Hey everyone, my name is Usman, and in this video we'll look at how we can make forms using Tanstack Form. So here I've got a form, I've got a lot of fields, I've applied validation in this form like the required validation, and there are other validations as well as a type. And then I can add multiple fields in the team members portions, so I can add array fields, I can remove them as well. Other than that, I've covered a lot of other stuff like form submission and integrating it with Tanstack Query. So if you're interested in this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's get into it. Okay, so this is the library we'll be looking at, and basically you know that Tanstack Form and all other Tanstack libraries are basically framework agnostic, so you can use it in any framework, React, Vue, Angular, etc. So that is one of the biggest advantages of using Tanstack libraries. If let's say right now you are in a React project and you use Tanstack Form, the same API could be translated to some other framework. So maybe in the future you have to work in Vue or Angular, you will have the exact knowledge of working in a form in React, and you can use that in Angular as well, which is great, and that's the best thing about it. Other than that, it's very performant. So if you have used form libraries like Formic or Final Form, etc., you know that in that case the whole form re-renders every time you change any input value in the form. So if you have a form which has like 200 fields, it is a big form, then it is not at all performant to re-render the entire form when you are typing or doing something in a one field. That doesn't make any sense. So Tanstack Form in this sense is very performant, where only the component that is being changed, the input or whatever, will re-render, the whole form would not re-render. And also there are a lot of other performance optimizations as well. So I've already downloaded Tanstack Form, so let's get into it. So basically I've removed all the code and now I'll start coding. So right now I have a app.tsx, and then I am rendering a form component here, and the form component as of right now is returning null. It's not returning anything. So let's start coding. So the main thing in Tanstack React Form is the useForm hook. So just like React hook form, if you have used it, there is a useForm hook, and that hook will basically give us the state, helper methods, and everything related to building the form. So let's import that. So I'll say const form is equal to useForm. I'll import it from Tanstack React Form. So useForm from Tanstack React Form. Cool. So this form will basically give us everything. So there will be two essential params we'll have to pass in the useForm hook, and one is the default values of the form, and that would be an object of keys and values, and then there will be a onSubmit function. So let's add default values. So for now I want to have a form with only one field name, so I'll say default values name, and it would be empty for now. And now if you hover over useForm hook, you'll see that now because of the name value I've added in default values, you can see the name here, here, and here. So now whenever I would use some utility function or anything from useForm, it will automatically be expecting a name param as a key value for the field, because this name corresponds to a field, right? And Tanstack Form is very type safe because of that. And then here I'll say onSubmit, and here I would get the form values value, and here you can see as well value is an object with name string. So because of the name I have passed here, it is expecting that when the form would be submitted, I would get an object with a name property and it would be string. So that is cool. I didn't have to supply any type or anything. It inferred the type from the default values. Now in order to make a value, I will get a component from this form variable. So let me add some markup. I'll be using Chakra UI as a library. You can use any library for the inputs and everything, material UI, etc. Doesn't matter. Cool. So here I would import form.Field. So this basically is the component which would give us the state, helpers, and other helpers for a particular field. So form.Field expects a prop, which is a name prop. So name would be, you can see that just because I've entered name here, it is auto completing name for me. So it would expect one of the key values of the field. So right now it's just name, so it is expecting only name here. And then children. So in the children, I will have to pass a component, and in the component props, I will get the information related to the field. So it would be field and then return. So here I will return the particular input or whatever. So I will use Chakra UI here. So I'll say form control Here I would import form label. So here I will write name, and then here I would add the input. So 3 things I will use from this field. One is the current state value. So I'll say value is equal to field dot state dot value. Then on change handler. So on change handler would be e, and then field dot handle change e dot target dot value. And then similarly, I will also pass an on blur. It isn't essential to pass on blur, but if you are adding validations which require that they should only trigger on blur, then you should add this. So I'll just add it. It's simple. So field dot handle blur. So now you can see that there is a name label and an input, and I can write stuff here. Great. Let me extract this into a separate component because I will use it to add other fields as well, and I don't want to repeat this markup. So here I'll say const field is equal to return, because I will add other stuff here as well related to validation. So showing the validation error and then showing the red border when there is an error. So I want to extract it into a separate component. So here I would get 2 things for now, label and children. So label would be string and children would be react node. I'll copy this. Here we will have children, and in children I will basically pass the particular input, because I can pass anything, input or select, etc. And here there will be a label. So here I would just say field label is equal to name and then input. Cool. Also, let's add form submission related logic so that I can show you the updated value at the time of submission in the onSubmit function. So I will wrap this with a form tag. So form, then I'll copy this and then I will paste it inside the form tags. Then here I will add a button. So I'll say button type should be equal to submit. Then color scheme should be blue. Here I would say submit. Cool. Now inside this form on submit, I will do some stuff. So submit, I want to prevent default. Obviously I don't want the page to refresh. I will also stop propagation so that if this form is nested inside a form, like the submission event, it doesn't propagate. And here I will say form dot handle submit. So let me add console.log value here so that you can see. So I will come here and let me add some value. So meow, and then I'll click on submit and you'll see the value here. So now let's add other fields as well. So I want to add some more fields. So name, username, that would be empty string as well. Then email, that would be empty as well. Then password, and then confirm password. This would be empty string, and then this would be empty string. Cool. So let me add all those fields as well. So I'll just copy this, then add it here. I'll call this email. I'll call this username, and you saw now I have 5 fields, right? So if I remove this and I start typing, you will see all the available keys I have, which is great. It inferred it from the default values I passed. So username, then email, password, and then confirm password. So now you can see all these fields. Great. Now we will look at form subscription. So there is a lot of form state which is relevant to the form. For example, is the form submitting right now? Is the form valid? What are the current errors in the form? Is the form dirty? That means that has any field of the form changed at all? So stuff like that. So how can we get it? There are two ways to get it. One is through the form.subscribe component. So let's do that. So here, just like the form.Field component, there is also a form.subscribe component. So I'll go here and basically that would give me the state. So as of right now, it is giving me all the state. So for example, I can say is dirty, is submitting, etc. But now the problem here is that whenever the form would change, anything would happen, this would re-render, and I don't want that. For now, I want only three things. I want is valid state, that is if the form is valid. If the form is valid, then and then only do I want to enable the submit button. Then there is dirty state. I only want to enable the submit button when at least one field has changed. There is no point in enabling the submit button when nothing has changed. And then another thing is submitting. So I want that when the form is submitting, I want to show a spinner inside this button so that the user can know that the form is submitting. And I also want to disable the button during that so that they don't make multiple submissions. So let's do that. So since I want only those three fields, I would also want that it should only re-render when those three fields change. So for that purpose, I will pass a selector here. So I'll say selector state, and I will basically return an array of the stuff I want. So I'll say state dot is valid, state dot is dirty, and then state dot is submitting. And now whatever I'm returning here would be available here. So now you can see that it is an array of booleans. So I'll say is valid, is dirty, and is submitting. So whatever I'm returning here, I got here, and I would say is disabled is equal to, if it's not valid then, or if it's not dirty, or is submitting. And then here is submitting is true, then I would show a spinner. So I'll import the spinner from Chakra UI. Its size would be XS, and otherwise the button content should be submit. Let me also give it a fixed width. Now if I refresh the form, you will see that the button is disabled. Why? Because the form is not is dirty. There hasn't been any change in the form. If I change anything, you'll see that the form enables. Similarly, let's test the is submitting thing as well. Let me make a sleep function so that I can demonstrate that there is some time being taken in the onSubmit function. So I'll say const sleep is equal to timeout number new promise resolve set timeout resolve timeout. So here I would say await sleep 1000. Let me add an async here. So now if I click on submit, you'll see the loader in action, and also the value would be logged after 1 second, because that is the amount of time it took inside the onSubmit function. Great. Now there is another way of doing that as well, and that is through the useStore hook. So I can say const whatever for now is equal to useStore. I can import it from Tanstack Form. Basically I will pass the store here, so form.store, so form.store, and then here I will pass a selector similar to that. So I can say I only want the is dirty here, and then here I'll have the is dirty value. This is okay as well, but basically in the form.subscribe case, this component is only re-rendering when these values are changing. But since I have used useStore in the parent component, basically the parent component would re-render when this is dirty value would change. So you can use the useStore component in a child component. Don't use it in a parent component, otherwise the parent component would re-render whenever this would change. But this is a way of getting form state as well. Let me remove this. Now we'll talk about listeners. So if you have like dependent fields and you have some logic where you want to reset a field when a field changes, or you want to add some value to a field based on another field change, then you can use listeners for that. So here I will add a listener in this field. So what I want is, when I add a name, when I blur from the field, then the first 3 letters of that name should be set as the username value of that form. So I'll say listeners. Cool. Then here I can pass on change, on blur, on mount, whatever. So on change listener would be called whenever this field would change. Similarly, on blur would be called when field would blur. That is why I pass this blur thing. So I want that this listener should be called when the blur event happens. So I'll say whenever this happens, I will get the current value here. So whenever this happens, I want to form.set field value. Again, you can see the types being shown, which is great. So I want to update the username value dot to lowercase dot slice 03. So now if I come here and I add a name, let's say Alex, and I blur from the field, you'll see that it basically takes in the first 3 letters, makes them lowercase, and sets it as a value of the username field. So that's how you can manage dependent fields in Tanstack Form. Now let's talk about validation. So there are multiple ways of doing validation in Tanstack Form. You can use like normal logic like JavaScript code to add validation in Tanstack Form, or you can use third-party libraries like Zod, Yup, etc. Your choice. But first we'll see how we can do normal validation, and then we'll look at how we can do validation with third-party libraries like Yup and Zod. So there are multiple ways of doing validation in Tanstack Form. There is the field level validation as well. Also, you can do validation in the form level by adding the validation in the useForm hook. So first of all, I will do field level validation. So I will add validators here. And then basically this validators expects, do I want the validation to be done on change? Do I want the validation to be done on blur, etc., etc. So let's say I want the blur. You can see all the ways in which we can do validation. So on blur async. So if a validation is async and you want to do it on blur, then you will add it here. On blur async the bounce milliseconds. So you want the async validation to occur after how much time? So stuff like that. So really powerful stuff. So first of all, I will add on change, and here I'll say I'll get the value here. Let's say I want to add required validation. So here I'll say if no value, then return name is required. Cool. So now I'll come here and I will empty the field, and you'll see that the button disables, which means that the validation has successfully been applied, but I'm not showing the errors now. So let's do that. So in order to show the errors, I will make use of the field object. So I'll pass the field inside this reusable field component. Cool. Let me add the corresponding error showing logic here in this reusable component. So this would be field. The type of field would be field API. Any. And basically, first of all, I want to make the border color red if there are any errors. So I can get the errors using field.state.meta.errors. Cool. So here I'll say is invalid. There is errors.length. So if there are any errors, then it's invalid and it should show the red border. And here I would import the form error message component from Chakra UI to show the error in red. And here I'll say errors.join. Now let me add the field in all the places. So I'll add it here, here and then here. So now if I add something and I go back and it's empty, you can see that there is a red border and it says name is required. So the validation was applied. Now in addition to that, let's try some other stuff. So this validation was being applied on change, right? So if I add something, the validation goes away, and if I remove the characters, then the validation is applied. But you can also add validation on blur. So I can say instead of on change, on blur. So now you can see that I'm changing the text, but the validation is not being applied. When I would blur the field, then and then only will the validation be applied. So if I remove the text content and then I blur, then you can see that the particular validation is applied in this field. Similarly, there are other stuff as well. So I can say on blur async or on change async, let's say. That would be easy to show. And then change on change async the bounce milliseconds. So how many times after if field state change do I want to call this? So I can say, let's say 2 seconds. So now if I, let's say, remove this text and the text input becomes empty, after 2 seconds will that validation be applied? You can see after a gap. So basically the validation API of Tanstack Form is very powerful. You can literally do anything here, which is great. Here where I'm showing the errors using field.state.meta.errors, you can also show errors using another way. Let me comment it. You can also say field.state.meta.errors map. So errors map, you can pass all the stuff, so on change, on blur, etc. So if you add on change here, and if you have an on change validation and there is an error, then that particular thing would be shown. If you type on blur here, basically the blur validation would be shown here, stuff like that. So you can see here that the result is the same. You can see the on change validation, but using a different way. Now you can add validation on the form level as well. So same API, so I can add validators, then here on change, etc. But here I would be like able to get the entire form value. So on change value, this value is an object of the entire form. Let's say remove this validation. So I'll say here if no value dot name return name is required. Now you will see that if I don't add anything in the name field, then the button gets disabled, but I don't get anything here in the name input. Why? Because this is a form level validation. So the form is still invalid and the button got disabled because of that. But since this is a form error and not a field error, so it is not being shown in the field. So if you want that this particular error should be shown in the field and you want to add all the validations at the form level in one place, then basically you can do this. So fields name, so you can return an object like that. So you are saying that this error should be shown in the name field. So now if I type something and I remove it, you can see the error. But basically this place is mostly for form related errors. Maybe you want to see whenever the email field blurs if the email is already registered or not, and based on that you want to show a pop-up or something. So basically this place is for that. But if you want to not do that and want to basically show field level errors here, then you can also do that. So let me return the string again and let's consider that this is a form level error only and not a field level error. If you want to show it, then basically you can use the useStore hook for it. So I will say const form error map is equal to useStore, and here I will pass the form store, and here I will have a selector. So I'll say state dot error map. So basically this is the form error map, not the field map. So let me console log it. So form error map, now it is invalid. So if I go to the form error map, you will see on change name is required. So in the on change, basically the form validation on change would be triggered on any fields on change because it is the forms on change. So when any field changes, it would basically check if the name is required, validation is being passed, and it is not being passed because the name input is empty. So that's why you can see here. Now I will like to add dependent validation. So let me remove this. Now I want to add a validation where the password and confirm password fields should be the same. So I want to show the error basically beneath the confirm password field if the content of the confirm password field is not the same as the password field. So let me add the validation. So here I'll add the validators. Here I want to do on change. I'll get the value here. So this value is basically the current value of the confirm password field, but I want to get the password value as well. So you can do that by accessing the field API. So using the field API, I can get any value inside the form, which is great. So I can do comparisons with other values as well. So here I'll say if value is not equal to field API dot form dot get field value. Here I'll pass password, then return passwords do not match. So here I'll type something and then here I'll type something else. You will see that it says passwords do not match. If the password match, this error would go away. Now there is one thing. Let's say I add some stuff here s, now password and confirm password fields have same text content, but now I can change the password field as well, but the validation didn't trigger because the validation is native to the confirm password field. But ideally that validation should trigger when the password field changes as well, because this validation is related to these two fields, not just the confirm password field. So that can be done easily as well. So I'll come here and I'll say on change listen to, and I'll pass an array here, an array of strings. So this validation currently runs only when confirm password field changes. But what if I want to run this validation also if some other field changes? So I want this validation to run when the password field changes as well. So I'll add that. Similarly, I can add other keys as well if I want, but that's not relevant to the current example, but I can since it's an array. So now I have s in the confirm password. Now if I'm the password field, now I'll change it. Validation of the confirm password will trigger again, which is how it should, because now both field values are not equal, and that is how you can do dependent validations. Now we'll see how to integrate third-party libraries. So Zod can be integrated very easily. You don't need to add any adapter or anything, but for yup you will need to add an adapter, and we'll see it in a minute. So for Zod you just need to install Zod, yarn add Zod, and that's it. So let's add that validation. So let me remove this validator from name, and then basically I'll add Zod to do that. So first of all I will create a schema from Zod. So here I'll say import z from Zod. Cool. Here I will add a schema. So I'll say Zod schema is equal to z.object. Here I'll add a name. So z.string, it should be a string, and then it should have a minimum of 1 characters, and the error should be name is required. Similarly, let me add an email validation as well. So z.string.email, it should be an email. Email is invalid. So if the email is invalid, it should show that error. So I'll copy this dot schema. I will go here in the validators portion, and I'll say on change, and I'll pass the schema. You are seeing an error because there are other fields as well. So let's just add other fields. So I'll say z.string, password should be z.string, and then confirm password should be z.string as well. Cool. So now if I change the form, you'll see that it says email is invalid. Basically this is a form level validation, so whenever I would change any field, it would show this error. Similarly, the name is required field validation is shown as well, which is great. Similarly, I can add a validation using yup. So I'll say import as yup from yup. So for using yup, you can just directly pass a yup schema. You'll have to basically add an adapter as well, which I will add in a minute. But first, let me make the yup schema. So I'll copy this. Here I'll say yup schema. Just change the z to yup. And here basically I would add required. Let me remove this. Cool. So here in the on chain I'll pass the yup schema, and then here I'll pass the validator adapter. So for yup, you will basically download Tanstack yup form adapter, and basically that is the validator for yup. So if you are coming from a library like formake etc., where you already use yup, then that is a way to use yup with Tanstack form. So now I refresh and I add a character, remove it, add some dummy characters. You can see that both the validations are applied on the form using yup. Okay, now we'll look at field arrays or array fields. So basically, array fields is a concept in which I can have one field with multiple subfields. So for this particular example, I want to add a team members field here, where there is a button add team member. When I click on that button, it should add a member field under the team members portion or section, and that member field should have two subfields. So one field for name and one for email. So basically, its type would look like an array of objects where each object has a name field of type string and an email field of type string. So that is what I want to do. First of all, I will add a default value here. So I'll say team members empty array, and its type would be email string, name string, array. Cool. So for making an array field, the process is similar. We'll use the form.Field, but I will add another prop which we'll see in a minute. So let me first of all copy this. So I'll copy this, and beneath the email field I will add this. I will call this team members, and then I'll pass mode is equal to array. So here instead of the field I will return a div for now, and I will add a button here. So this button would be add team member. So when the mode for a particular field is array, then this field object contains some array methods to basically work with array fields. So what I want is when I click on add team member, it adds an object to the team members array. So let's do that. So I'll say on click is equal to field dot push value. So push value would basically push an object in the team members array, and you can see the type here. So I will initially add email empty string and name empty string. Cool. Now whenever I would map something, then basically that would be present as an item in field.state.value. So for string based fields like email, field.state.value had the type of string, but since this is an array type, field.state.value would be of type array, and we can map it to map the fields. So here I'll say field.state.value. You can see that it is of type email string name string array. Value.map, I will ignore the value and I will grab the index, and here I will return for now just a div, and let me call this team member and then I, so that you can see what is going on. So now I'll come back and I'll click on this button, and you can see that it says team member 0. Similarly, I click on it again and again, and basically field.state.value is getting appended with an object email name. So what I want is, instead of this box, I want to display two fields, the name field and an email field. So basically I will use the same thing, form.Field, but instead of passing a string key like team members, I'll pass a dynamic key. So it would look like team members 0.name, team members 0.email. Those would basically correspond to the email and name field of the first item in the team members array. Similarly, team members 1.name team members 1.email would correspond to the name and email field of the second item in the team members array. So let's do that. So I'll copy this. Here I'll add a flex container so that we can have those fields side by side. So here and here I'll copy paste this. So this would have a key, and its key would look like, it should be unique. So I would say it should be I, which is the index, and then name. And the name would be just like I told you before. It would be team members. The index would go here, and then the name. Here I would add name as well. Let me call this subfield so that we can distinguish between this field and this field. So here I would say subfield, 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 and subfield. Cool. And similarly I would copy this and I'll paste it here. This would be email would go here, and then email. So now you can see that I added the 3 items, and you can see the 3 items here. I can add whatever I want. So first member is alex @89.com. similarly David, then David @gmail.com, etc. And if I go and submit the form, you will see the value here. So team members is an array, and it consists of objects with email and name, and you can see the properties here. Now we have seen how we can add an object in a field array and how we can change the value of a field, but now we'll see how we can delete a field, because that is important as well. So we'll do that. So for that particular purpose, I will basically absolutely position a delete icon with every field, and I will call a method from the field to delete that particular field. So here inside each field I will display a button. So it would be icon button, its area label would be delete, its icon would be trash. On click it would be field dot remove value, and I will pass the index. So this expects an index, and I'll absolutely position it. So position would be absolute, top would be 2, right would be 2, and size would be SM. So now I'll go ahead, you can see the trash icon here. Let me color it red as well. So color scheme red. Cool. So if I click on this, the team member corresponding to David, you can see that disappears. Cool. Similarly, this array field has a lot of other array methods as well. For example, insert value, move value, then you have replace value, etc. So there are a lot of other methods as well which you can use to work with array fields, and it's extremely powerful. Now I will look at how you can reset the form. So there are 2 ways in which you can reset the form. One is, this is the form object. If you want to reset from outside of this particular portion, that is, you have a reset button and you want to reset the form using that, you can just call the form.reset function. If you want to reset the form from inside the onSubmit, and that is the thing you may want to do, maybe after form submission you want to reset the form, then you can also do that. So here you also get the form API. So here you can do form API.reset. So now let me add some gibberish, and if I submit, you'll see that the form resets after that. Great. Now right now I have a default values object, and everything is empty, but in most of the cases you will have a query bringing in the data. So even if it's an async value, you can just pass the data object here and it would work seamlessly, nothing would change. So here I've got a dummy query with the query key user, and I'm just waiting for 1 second and returning this pre-filled data. So I can just do const data is equal to use user, and then just pass the data here. So now I load a form, and after 1 second all the data which is coming from the use user query basically populates here. So if you don't want to show a blank form and then a pre-filled form, you can also use the is loading param you get from use query and basically show a loading state till the data comes from the query, and then you can show the form whatever you want. So that is it for the video. I hope you learned a lot from it. I tried to add all the things which we normally use in a form in this course. I tried to show you like what can be done using Tanstack Form, from validations to form submissions to form state management, etc. So I hope you like it. If you liked it, make sure to share it with your friends, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.